Live. Here we are, live on my Facebook page for my very first transatlantic author chat, which I'm very excited about. I must say that when I first signed up to Lake Union Authors, I was really lucky. I was introduced to this group of incredibly experienced, established and successful authors who turned out to be, you know, super supportive as well. It was a real sense of that I became part of this amazing team. So I'm very excited to be able to introduce three of them to you today. We have with us Emily Carpenter.
Hello.
Who is an actor and a producer. She worked on soap operas. We're going to get into all
a long time ago.
It all happened a long time ago, you know, and we still live on these glories. And her most recent novel, which is coming out in October, is called Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters. So hello, Emily, and thank you for joining us. Amber Cowie is here. She is a writer and a mom, and apparently she once worked at the only ski resort in Scotland.
That's true.
So I guess someone has to. And her most recent novel is called Lost Lake. And Catherine McKenzie. Hello, Catherine. She is, impressively, a practicing lawyer and just happens to write best-selling novels like on the side. She's the author of, well, many novels. I'll Never Tell, which has been optioned for TV. And the most recent one, which literally came out this week, is called You Can't Catch Me. I absolutely love that cover of You Can't Catch Me.
And this is the Canadian cover. It came out in Canada this week. That was the American.
Yes. Yeah. And it was out in the US a couple of months ago.
And the UK a couple of months ago, yeah.
And the UK, with that amazing flying hair cover, which I just think is wonderful. Now, as I said, we are quite transatlantic today, so I thought maybe we could start by just saying where we are. So, Catherine, where are you dialing in from?
I am in Montreal, Canada.
And what's it like there today? What's going on in Montreal?
It's a little rainy today.
Is it?
A little rainy here in Montreal today, but we've had a nice summer, and it was a little bit of fall creeping in, which is a bit scary to think about, but it's okay.
You know, some years ago, my husband and I, because we've lived sort of in various places around the world, we've lived like on 3 continents, and we sat down and made this list. We were trying to work out the perfect place that we could end up. And so we had this like hit list of all the things that our perfect place would have. And we decided that the only place that fit the list was Montreal, Canada. So, you know, is it the dream? Are you living the Furniss dream there?
You know, it's a great city, honestly. I've lived here all my life. I might want to end up in London. I don't know. But, you know, there's lots of culture and great restaurants, and it's a sort of slower pace. There's a little bit of a European feel to it, international city. So there's a lot going for it, but no place is perfect.
Yeah. Well, it sounds
if your dream includes the most delicious bagels in the world, then
that's true. We do have the best bagels. Sorry, New Yorkers, but ours are better.
So why is that? What? Explain the bagel thing. Why?
So there's 2 kinds of bagels, and the bagels here are a little bit sweeter and thinner and have a bigger hole in them. And both methods are old Eastern European methods of making bagels, and it's actually called the Montreal bagel style, and they're poached first in a sugar water.
That was a thing. Oh my God, a thing.
Yeah, now it's a real thing.
Eat the bagels.
No, the bagels are the best. And then, you know, a New York style bagel is almost more like a bun with a divot in it, and it's puffier.
Yeah, they're quite dense, aren't they?
Yeah, they're quite dense. Yeah. So we have a couple of weird foods, but you know, a good food that we're famous for is bagels with like cream cheese and smoked salmon.
Yeah. My daughter is a big bagel aficionado, so now that's another tick in our box of places to
go.
You can go and watch them being prepared. Like you can see like the bagel factory, and
it's very cool.
It's really fun.
And eat them like 5 seconds after they've been baked in this wood oven and stuff. So it's very cool.
Okay, you're making me hungry now. I've got to get
Sorry.
Now you, Amber, with my husband in Montreal. We're all coming to your town
for the bagels.
We're all moving in. We're all moving over there, mainly to get away from the disastrous places that we live. But anyway, we won't go into that for now. Amber, where are you?
So I live on the opposite side of Canada as Catherine. I live on the west coast of Canada. I live in a small town in between Vancouver and Whistler.
called Squamish. It's right on the West Coast. We got oceans and mountains, but no bagels.
Oh,
it is very pretty though. My sister spent a summer in Squamish maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and I came up and visited her there, and it really is beautiful.
To me, it's the best place in the world. I love it here so much. But you know, it's a small town, and I wouldn't like really, if you're like a foodie, I wouldn't maybe recommend it that highly. But we have really cute cats also.
Oh, that's a delightful Canadian cat. And Emily, where are you? You are in a completely different place.
Yeah, I'm in Georgia, US of A, and it is hot as Hades down here. Actually, I was just looking at the temperature, 79 Fahrenheit today, which is, you know, that's not
hot. That's not bad.
No, we had a really big rainstorm, so I think it just kind of cooled everything down. But I think the humidity is like 101%.
Oh God,
yeah, like that, you know. Yeah. So, but yeah. I live in a suburb north of Atlanta, so
very nice, very nice. And I am dialing in from Brighton, which is a town on the south coast of England. If you went like in a straight line down from London, you would hit Brighton. It's a bit sort of, I suppose you could say it's kind of the San Francisco of England. It's not as big, obviously, but it's quite sort of bohemian and a bit laid back. It sort of became famous in the late 1700s because the Prince Regent built a palace here for his mistress, and had lots of debauched parties. And after that, it sort of became like the go-to place for your dirty weekend, as we call them. And so it's always, for the last couple of 100 years, it's still trading on that reputation as like the place to go for your fun, crazy weekends. And now we're beset by hen parties and stag do's and couples who may or may not be married to each other.
Wow.
Who come to Britain. It's a fun kind of time.
You're like the Las Vegas of Britain.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a perfect place for writers to live. I'm sure that you stopping there is just phenomenal.
There's a lot of writers. There's a lot of writers here. Yeah, huge community. I've only actually lived here for a year, so I'm trying to kind of, you know, break in and get to know a few people. But yeah, there's a lot of really well-known writers here, which is fantastic. What about you, ladies? Do you like to be part of a writers community? What about you, Emily?
Yeah, there are a lot of writers in Atlanta. One in particular that I think you all know, Kimberly Bell, lives here, and a couple of other, a handful of other writers that I get together with. I mean, other than in the pandemic era, I have gotten together with them pretty regularly, and it is I love it. It is something that I thrive on, just having people nearby that, you know, who understand the business and just the everyday struggles and, you know, the successes and the failures. It's really just great to have someone around the corner that you can just pick up the phone and say, oh my gosh, this happened today, and what do I do? And, you know.
Yeah, someone who gets it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What about you, Amber? Does it help you? Because I've always been part of writers groups, and, you know, and it helps me. I don't know, I find it quite inspiring, even sort of setting each other deadlines and things like that. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I'm part of 2 amazing writers groups here, and they're really, I think, very beneficial to me. Partly in a way, Emily, like in a different way than what you're saying, they're really beneficial to me because the people who are in them are working usually in quite different genres and fields than I am. Like, there's a couple people that are in my groups who work in sort of suspense thrillers, like that kind of style, like I do. But then there's also children's authors, people who write more like creative nonfiction and memoirs. There's a huge climbing and athletic community in Squamish, lots of like mountaineering, lots of skiing. So I am colleagues and part of a group with a number of people who write memoirs like in that realm. And so it's cool because you get a chance. I mean, I think personally, the writers group that has been the most beneficial to me and always will be, is the one that you are all a part of. That, like you mentioned, Joe, when we first started, that when you first came on to Lake Union, you got to be connected with the incredible writers that were part of that publishing imprint. And I have never felt so embraced and supported by other writers as I do online. And so it's fantastic to have these people in the place that I live that I'm able to speak with and be physically present with, except during 2020, but most of the time. But also like the online support that has been provided to me is just like, it's such a touchstone for me, and it's such a source of comfort and reassurance in a way that I could never really describe, and was so surprised by, because I had some rough starts to trying to get a book published, and I just felt like I got a huge hug as soon as I got to be part of some of the groups that I'm on online and in person too.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things I've missed most this year, actually, obviously with the lockdown, is I used to go on with a writer friend of mine, like you said, in a different genre, actually. She writes children's books, but we would go on sort of what we used to call plot walks. So we would go out sort of quite early in the morning and just do this kind of hour blast round, and we would sort of have, you know, half an hour of her, whatever she was struggling with, and half an hour of mine, and we would sort of sort it out between us. And it just, I think it helps so much to talk through whatever it is that you're trying to kind of resolve. I don't know. What about you, Catherine? Do you tend to kind of bounce ideas off other people, or?
I mean, yes and no. I think I have different communities of writers. So I have a couple of friends in Montreal who are writers that, ironically, I went to law school with somebody, and we both realized our first books were about to come out at our 10th law reunion.
Oh my gosh.
She was talking behind me. We'd actually already connected earlier in the night, and she had moved to New Zealand right after law school, and she's French Canadian, and she didn't speak that much English in law school. And then suddenly I talked to her 10 years later, and she's talking to me with a New Zealand accent, and I'm like, what happened? So we kind of got sidetracked talking about that. And then later in the evening, she was standing behind me, and I heard her say that she had a book coming out, and I turned around and I'm like, but I have a book coming out. Like, how did we miss that? And so, that's been a point of connection. And then I've met other writers in Montreal after I became published, but kind of like you, Amber, I think, early on I connected with a big group of writers online. And some of my very, very closest friends today are people that I met that way, who I've obviously met most of them in person at this point. And, I got to meet Emily in person at the Decatur Book Festival a couple of years ago. And, there's a Lake Union group, but before that, a precursor to that group, I belonged to another group of 50 writers. Where some people have come and gone, but we've been there for 10 years, and we really kind of know everything about one another. And it's a water cooler, whatever problems there are in the business, or frustrations, or good news too. And that really helps. And I also bounce stuff off with my sister. Reads everything that I write kind of as I write it in chunks. And so often I bounce plot stuff off of her. But yeah, for sure. It's like any job has its own things. Yeah. And, my husband, like, maybe he doesn't even listen anymore when I'm complaining about the book business, but sometimes.
Yeah. Is this the cat book or the magic?
Yeah, I know. He does do stuff like that. He's like, wait, this is the book with the girls with the same name, right? Like, I'm like, yeah. Gotcha. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's
the same. So yeah, I think it's important to have community, and like what Amber said, I guess I never thought about it that much beforehand, but I found 95% of writers I've met are hugely supportive, really generous people. And even when, technically we'd be in competition with one another, I don't think people really act like that, which is great. And, there's bad apples in any profession, but on the whole, I've really found writers to be nice and generous with their time and supportive, and which is good to have that community.
Especially, strangely, crime and suspense writers. You think you're sitting here writing this dark stuff, and then you go. I go to, normally this year not, but normally I go to quite a few sort of festivals and conferences, and there's such a warm bunch of people. But like Amber, probably the very first, I'm not going to name names obviously, but the first sort of couple of writers I met were like really quite offish, like not very encouraging at all. And I got into a bit of panic and was thinking, oh, do I want to get into this world? but I think it was just bad luck. They were just, I don't know what, going through their own stuff, I suppose. And since then, yeah, everyone's so supportive. We're talking of community and everything. I should say hello to some of the people who have dropped in. So Brigida is in Switzerland. Hello, I used to live in Switzerland, just outside Winterthur.
So is there a country that you couldn't say that of? I feel like you're
yeah, Singapore, Switzerland.
Yeah, no, only Singapore, Switzerland, and Cameroon. Cameroon is my odd one to throw in over the, you know, or drinking game. Who's drunk? Who's lived in Cameroon? Me.
Because that comes up all the time. That's like the first question I always ask.
Yeah.
If you lived in Cameroon,
yeah, I get to drink. Hello to Carla in Birmingham, Alabama. Hello, Mary.
Hey, Carla.
Yes. Hello to Lauren in Hoover, and Kimberly is here, and Mary. Mary's been to Brighton. Come again, come again. Hi. She's one of our Lake Union authors. Oh, and hello to Tammy. I've been chatting to Tammy this week, so that's lovely that she's here. So, and I should say, if you have any questions for Emily, Catherine, Amber, or myself, do put them in the comments, and I will be your little conduit to these ladies. So, Catherine, your book came out in Canada this week. You Can't Catch Me, and I have to say, when I saw the title of it, it kind of made me smile, because so many of your books seem to be about women kind of fleeing, disappearing, running, and then this one is like literally, it's like, you know, you've really got it right on there.
About that, Catherine.
What it is about this theme that, you know, draws you back.
Interesting. I don't know. I've never thought about it that way. Interesting. You know, honestly, I don't know. I think I am drawn to secrets, and I think that you know, when you're writing in this suspense thriller genre that women, I think, have created, as opposed to that traditional thriller where there's the external threat and it's like the CIA or a bomb or the world's about to die, you know, but it's sort of internally driven suspense novels that come out of a women's fiction perspective. I think that, you know, the threats are more internal. And so secrets, things that are hidden, the way people react to problems are things that I think, or at least for me, are one of the things that makes the engine go in my thrillers and my suspense books. So I think that's probably it. And I mean, yeah, you're probably thinking about The Good Liar, which is definitely somebody running away from a tragedy. But I do think that, you know, this is more of a chase book, I think, ultimately. Like the main character is chasing somebody down, and my last 5 books have all started out with different titles, and then for whatever reason, that title then often late in the game, someone's like, "Oh, we're not sure about the title," and I'm like, "Oh." You know, I think with I'll Never Tell, which also started as something else, but that's when I moved into books with The Good Liar, I moved away from books with one-word titles. But I'll Never Tell kind of had a sing-songy kid thing to it, and so I thought You Can't Catch Me was kind of the mirror of that in terms of title. So that was kind of how we ended up with that. But the original title was actually 3-Card Molly.
I like that.
I liked it too. I know, but they thought it gave away too much about the book. So anyway,
yeah. You mentioned there, like, kind of you know, secrets. And Emily, I mean, I was thinking earlier today that obviously all of our books are about secrets because they're all suspense novels, so there's always a secret. But actually, although there's sort of those plot secrets, quite often I think what we're wrangling with are those kind of emotional secrets.
Oh yeah,
that people have, you know. And I noticed that in your book, in the Hawthorne Sisters, you know, everyone seems to almost have an emotional part of themselves that they're kind of hiding.
Yeah, and they're always in my books related to family secrets and kind of the secrets that we all know that, like, say, one family all knows that they're keeping, but nobody talks about it, you know. And I think that's something that's probably universal, but it feels like a very kind of Southern Gothic thing, that there's this family secret, maybe generational. that everybody is kind of tiptoeing around. And in my books, I feel like that's when the secret breaks open and they finally have to deal with the fallout.
Yeah. Tell us about the Southern Gothic then, because you mentioned it there. I wanted to ask you about that. How do you...
do you have a couple of hours?
Oh, I love any kind of
my favorite topic in the whole world.
Okay. Yes, Emily, I absolutely do. Please go.
Yeah.
No, I think really you can talk forever about it because there's a million different definitions of what it is and what people think it is. I'll never forget one time I was on vacation and talking to a woman about my books, and she said, "Oh, what's this genre?" And I said, "Well, it's Southern Gothic." And she was like, "You mean vampires?"
No.
No. Not at all, but okay.
Not vampire.
Not at all, but yeah, I think Southern Gothic is again, it builds on that Gothic thing that your book has, you know, that dark and stormy night and a crumbling mansion and, you know, the kind of dramatic fears. And it used to be a damsel in distress. Now it's a very independent woman with some agency who can take care of herself. And
there's like a mean mother or something.
There's definitely people after her, but so Southern Gothic kind of takes those elements of Gothic and infuses it with the whole story of the American South, and that involves slavery and the ramifications of slavery and sort of the curse and the brokenness that this area brought onto itself, and the glory that they thought they had and then lost. So there's elements of like ghosts and just some really strange people and secrets and just some messed up stuff.
Yeah. A lot of that sort of underlying unresolved tension, but and the landscape as well, because it's so kind of hot and steamy that that's just sort of literally seems to
swampy
houses like moldering into the ground, right?
Yeah. Right. Plantation houses moldering and secrets buried and also very tied into religion and sort of that religious tradition in the South and its responsibility in the past of the South. So
especially your most recent. But I feel like so much of what you bring into the secrets, the world of secrets, like everyone here has different ways of embodying that in their work. And I always feel like your work has this sort of legacy of secrets, like this ancestry and what it looks like in every generation. And because of like the different historical contexts in which the secrets are being either made or kept or revealed, then there's those elements that the timeline is really important. You have such a sense of history in your work.
Thank you. And can you please come to my future talks to explain? You put it really well. But that's true. Like that feeling of sort of, we have this heavy weight of responsibility and secrets on this family. And now it's time, there's always my main character who's like ready to break free and tell the truth and, bring some light into the situation. Yeah.
That's interesting what you said about the sort of the legacy and the idea that everything is sort of crumbling and slipping. And actually then there's quite a connection almost then between sort of, England, which I think is also sort of one of those places that is always having to renegotiate its kind of past.
Yes,
and
it's,
guilt over the past and the sense that it's sort of its glory days. And all of that kind of tension is kind of there as well.
Yeah.
Right. But the Gothic, I think, comes out of England, right? Like Jane Eyre. And then Jane Austen actually wrote a send-up of Gothics, right? Northanger Abbey is her send-up because they were so popular and I think she hated them. And she was like, okay, I'm going to just take the Gothic and make fun of it. And, that's then Northanger Abbey was born, right? So I think it's like taking that framework of the house and the past, and then I think layering the South over it and its particular history.
Yeah, I think it's kind of written on the land in certain places. You know, here in England, I got quite fascinated with this a couple of weeks ago because I was writing an article about folk horror, which is about sort of folklore in books and how you can sort of use these kind of scary old legends to sort of, you know, to create a sort of a slightly Gothic atmosphere. And I was looking at the map, and there's so many sort of crazy names, places like, you know, I'm trying to remember them now off the top of my head, but there was like a place called Ashes Hollow and a place called Starved Crow. You know, and you just think like, what on earth has happened in these places to leave these kinds of little names behind? You know, most of the places are named after a thing or a person or something that happened there, and there is this kind of dark past that's kind of written right there, and so you kind of can't escape from it.
Yeah, but even in England, I mean, you're in Devon, right? Like, that's where there's all. If you look from above, there's literally people like that. People cut into the chalk, right? That you could only see in the air, which they would never have been able to do at the time. Like, and they spent how long did they spend making these chalk images in the ground that are still there 200 years later? For who? You know, like, what were they doing?
And horses as well. We like horses. So there's a few chalk people, chalk men, normally quite phallic.
Right. So
quite an amusing thing to do when we were kids was to climb up a hill and go and obviously lie in the very obvious place on this. And then you get quite a lot of horses as well. And actually the book that's just come out, The Last to Know, I set that on top of this kind of hill fort, which is like a prehistoric thing. So sort of about 2,500 years ago, for reasons that nobody's quite sure, people decided they would take sort of like an existing hill and then they would kind of push all the dirt and stuff up into these kind of ridges up the side of it, probably to defend themselves. And there was one near where I was living that had sort of collapsed a bit, obviously, over the years, and then it had a farm right on top of it. And I just kind of thought, well, that's a great place that's just an inherently Gothic place. If I can end up with all my characters in this house on top of a hill that is, you know, kind of you can't get access to, you know, and that's why I think it's
anything could happen.
Yeah, it's just already there on the land. And I think you do a similar thing, don't you, Amber, in a slightly different way, in that you've got, you know, two of your books at least are real small town mysteries. You seem to really dig into that kind of small town tension. Is there something about the tight-knit communities that work for you?
My brain is going a million miles a minute here because I mean, I love to talk about my own books, but I've never had a chance to talk to all three of you about your books, and I am a huge fan of all of your books. And so I'm thinking a lot about secrets and how, Catherine, I feel like in your books often like the secrets are like they're being like actively activated. I'd say like there's a reason, something's like almost like coming up, and it's like, as much as we talk about how like domestic and thrillers like we are writing, they're like internally driven, like often there's like this external impetus in your books, and it is this like something's going to be revealed, like something is pressing, and like that's the sort of inside
there's a ticking clock.
And sometimes you don't always know what it is until like the character knows, but you as the reader have to find out, which is such a great way to drive the narrative. And then Emily, I feel like in your books often like there's this like we're presented with like this sort of Gothic arena that we understand, like that language. We know that there's something underlying. And what I think you do so well is that you give us enough of the secret that we're like, ooh, what is that? Like like you said, like the families that hold like this information, this secret is known within the families, but it's not really known entirely.
Yeah.
And so there's a piece of it that has to be excavated and like revealed.
Yeah.
And then Joe, I feel like in your books, your secrets, they're so like, they're often, well, I would say in all three of your books in totally different ways. It's the setting that holds the secret. Like it's the place in which it's based, particularly in The Last to Know, like the one that just came out. That's so clear from the beginning. Like you were describing that landscape. And as soon as I love your books, but I was pretty hooked like from the beginning. But like the first, I was reading the first excerpt where you're describing like the land, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, why? Like, why does this exist the way it does? Why did someone build it like this? And so you have to like uncover the land to find out what happened to the people,
Yeah.
which is such an interesting way to kind of build a story, because the setting is so much a part of what you're doing. And I think that's true for me. Like, I think that we have that in common, like that. I mean, we all do that, but I think that often place is the thing that I think of first.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that small towns are sort of inherently very secretive. And there's those elements of them where there is stuff that's known that people, oh, that's so-and-so, she does this, X happened to her. But it's not really true until you learn what's at the very root of whatever it is that happened that other people can see but don't really understand.
No.
And
you have the classic setup, Amber, in Lost Lake, in that you have an outsider coming in.
Yeah.
Who has to negotiate all of this, and everyone's telling her something, and she's got no idea who to trust.
Yeah, and that was a really fun one for me, because it's, I grew up in a small town, but have lived in a lot of cities and live in a small town now. And so I liked the sort of like, I think that as you grow as a writer, you can start to understand tropes a little bit more. And I wanted to really play like with that idea of like this sort of stranger in a strange land, and she's running from something she doesn't quite understand towards something she absolutely doesn't understand. And that's such a great way to like, I think, just place this person in a situation where she has to learn about herself at the same time that you're learning about her. Yeah. Which is a great, like, that's why that kind of like, I'm moving to a town and I know no one kind of works for a narrative.
Yeah. But I think also like coming out of that too, like in a small town, everyone thinks they know one another, right? We all think that you know everyone's business, but nobody really knows what's going on behind closed doors, even in a small town. And then I think also that when you place an other, whatever it is, so, like in my book, she grew up in a cult and she literally didn't know how society worked, right? And so she's being dropped down into like the middle of New York City at 18 years old and is like, what? Like, why are there people? Why are they touching me? Like, what, it's everything is new. But I think in a smaller way, just having that thing of other, whether it's returning home after 30 years or it's meeting, in your book, Joe, meeting your husband's family for the first time and going back to his small town. I think it's when you take that other, your people can have a different perspective and can see things that people who are in the middle of a situation can't see. Mm-hmm. And so that can help with secrets and revealing things too in these situations, right? Because, to the point of, to wrap this try and wrap it in a bow, but like with Emily and secrets, I felt the same thing when I wrote my book, I'll Never Tell, which is like in a family, if they all just sat down together and talked openly, they could figure out the mystery in like 5 minutes, but they're never going to do that because their history will never keep them, can never allow them to have those conversations. And I think,
they're motivated, I think in a small community, you're probably more motivated to keep your secrets.
100%. Well, it's a way of keeping anonymity, right? Because like when everyone does feel like they know you, think about the claustrophobia of high school, right? Like you're a certain kind of person and you got put into a slot, like probably in the first year of high school. And then you're just in that slot the whole time. And to break out of that is so hard. And I think that can replicate itself in many different ways. Like we all have our slots in our families. We all have our slots in our office, and people can see people in a one-dimensional way. And ultimately everybody has many facets to them, right? And so that's where the secrets come in, that's where the hiding comes in, and that's where the reveal comes in too. Yeah. I also think that each of us should take Amber to all of our book events in the future, and she can just talk about our books for us.
Oh. Yeah. So there was a band when I was in university called the Mighty Mighty Bosstones. I don't know if you guys know. It's like
I've heard of them,
small Canadian ska band, and I went to one of their shows once, and there was a person in the band whose job was just to stand on the side of the stage and dance.
Like you are that guy.
I could be that person.
I love it.
It's great.
I'm thinking sorry about my computer was dying. I had to plug. But to me, one of the most chilling sort of, we're talking about like physical setting in the Gothic novel or the suspense novel. And to me, there's some element of when everyone knows a secret in a place. It's sort of like, oh, the skeleton in the attic that we do not speak of. Like, and they all have maybe a different version, or they all sort of know part of the secret, if not all of the secret, or they might have some of it wrong. But when a whole town, you know, sort of is in on a secret, and you have that other come in, or a family is in on a secret, and there's, you know, I just love that. I just think that's fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great because you can use it for every single kind of story. Like there's just like, I just watched, I think anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that I'm like slightly obsessed right now with the movie Midsummer.
Yeah. Yes, that's perfect. Like everyone knows about the ritual, except for poor Frances Pugh, and you know, and her boyfriend, and her unfortunate boyfriend.
He did not know. He did not know what he had signed up for.
Did not know.
No.
Yeah. No, I think I was a bit like Catherine said. I was quite fascinated by this idea in The Last to Know that you can never kind of escape from yourself. Like if you, so I have my character. He's not the narrating character. He's the husband of the narrating character. But he kind of had gone away from where he grew up for a significant amount of time, and then came back. And as his wife, she starts to get this sense that he's almost being sort of dragged back to where he was and who he was and how he was when he was a teenager. Like she's losing him back to this place because the people there won't let him stop being. They won't let him move on.
Yeah,
you know, they can't forget who he was before, and even though he, you know, she believes that he's changed, he can't, and so he can never escape from himself. And so I quite like that sort of little claustrophobic, you know, element of small town life. Catherine, I was going to ask you, because I read a description of one of your books that said you write about women living superficially happy lives, which I thought was really fascinating. And again, I mean, that's probably something that we all do to a degree in a lot of domestic fiction. But then I got to thinking, obviously, as I said at the beginning, you are a practicing lawyer. I wondered whether there's something about your work that sort of informs that, whether you're used to kind of seeing behind the facade a little bit, the social facade that people put up.
I mean, it's true. And to open a parentheses, I'm actually retiring from the practice of law next week. So.
Whoa!
Congratulations!
Congratulations!
Thanks. But you know, it's true that as a lawyer, you're living in other people's problems all the time. So you are always seeing people in conflict, right? Like I did litigation, so. You know, nobody's going to see a litigation lawyer because things are going right in their life, like that, you know, at any level. So, so it's a certain skewed view of people, which, you know, really can help you with empathy and things like that, which I think is super important for just humanity, but for writers, obviously. Yeah. And, but, you know, I do think, and particularly in maybe the last 10 or 15 years with social media, but we've always been like this, because what's the polite thing when somebody says, like, how are you? You're supposed to say fine, right? These are like rhetorical questions, and you're just supposed to say fine, and you're not supposed to be like, well, actually, you know, and we do that with social media too, right? We post the good stuff, you know, like, look, I'm in this amazing locale, or, you know, look at my book. And it's not the like, oh, and I was like, didn't take a shower for 3 days to get that stupid copy edit done, and blah, 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 you know, like, so, like that is the way that we present ourselves to the world, and I think part of that is necessary for society to function. But I think it's maybe more about nuance. You know, that there is nobody who has a perfect life. I don't believe that. I don't believe that there's anybody who doesn't have secrets, no matter how small. You know, and I don't think it's possible to live that way, and I think it's okay. So I you know, for me, a theme in my books is exploring what those secrets are. And I think sometimes, you know, like in my book, The Good Liar, each woman had a massive secret. And one of them was like insane, crazy secret. But the woman whose secret was much more ordinary, it was just as important to her to keep that secret and to hide it from the world, because it was so bound up in her identity and who she was and how people reacted to her, that she just felt like if people knew the truth, which was, again, not that big a reveal, but was so important to her. So I think that I think that that's something that's interesting to me is looking behind that facade. And like, ultimately books are about conflict. You know, I don't know that readers always think this way, but like, I always talk about that in book talks. Like, you know, a book cannot be about like, I got up this morning and then I had a tea and then I had some breakfast and then I watched the television. Like, no, like what bad thing is happening to you in the first page that is going to then drive the rest of the book. And so I think that, you know, one way of getting into that conflict is peeling back that sort of facade and looking at what's really going on, you know?
Yeah. I think that's so interesting what you say about sort of, you know, problems that maybe don't seem like that significant from the outside.
Right.
It makes me think sort of slightly strangely of something. When I used to be a BBC reporter, and I remember going one day to an inquest to cover an inquest into a death, and it was this horrible situation where a guy had killed his family and then killed himself. So it was this, you know, horrific thing, and we sat in the inquest, I think, for like 2 days, while all the, you know, and they talk about the causes of, they try to sort of establish the, you know, the causes of death. And basically it turned out that he did this because he owed really quite a small amount of money, probably about $500.
Oh, wow.
Which, you know, was obviously a huge amount of money to him because he didn't have it. But it's not, you know, it wasn't a vast amount of money. And this terrible, terrible thing had happened because of this actually quite, you know, what to a lot of outsiders would have seemed like, you know, not a big deal. And I think that has always stayed with me. I was quite a young reporter at the time, and that sense of shame and how powerful shame can be. And I suppose that is sort of what makes people keep their secrets very often, even if it's something that doesn't seem that significant to the outside, you know, to other people.
Yeah. Well, there's a really powerful moment in Bowling for Columbine where it's actually Marilyn Manson, of all people, who says this. But, you know, that's about the kids who shot up Columbine. And he says, you know, I wish I could just tell them you were almost out of there because, and there's life after high school, you know, and because like they were being bullied and they were unhappy, and obviously there were some pretty bad things going on, but in the grand scheme of a life, I mean, nothing would justify what they did, but in the grand scheme of a life, it's the sort of things where if they hadn't done that day, and now it's 20 years later, and they look back and they've been like, yeah, high school sucked, but there was life after high school, and I could reinvent myself and I could be somebody else. And I just thought that was so poignant, what he said, to really encapsulate that feeling that I think, you know, in much less crazy ways that we've all had at different moments in our life, right? Where you feel stuck and you feel trapped. But, you know, if you can just see beyond that moment, there is something, things can be different. And it's doing that, being able to have the strength or the support to see beyond that moment and to move on to something else. And if you don't, then you do get stuck, and you can do really extreme things because of something that to somebody else would not be that massive moment in their life. For whatever reason with that person, is something that just drives them to extremes. So,
but I think that's so, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we all write about those kind of moments for our characters, right? I mean, that's like almost the point. We're going to write about this one character who has come up against his or her, it's usually her, you know, most desperate moment.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And do you guys ever like getting into that headspace, that like kind of desperate headspace? Do you ever feel yourself like it's not like you confuse what you're writing with your real life.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot to write these books where these characters are very desperate. I can feel it sometimes. Do you guys feel that ever?
I can, but I think but I avoid certain types of stories like that. Like, I've never written about a dead child or a missing kid, or even though I don't have children, like, to me, that's just too depressing a space to live in, because exactly like that, you are walking a mile in somebody's shoes, and like other people do it really effectively, but it's just not a headspace I personally feel comfortable living in. So for sure, I think I might avoid certain types of stories because of that, for myself. But yeah, you absolutely have to live in the shoes of,
Catherine, I need to ask this now because the first book I ever read by Jo is about children.
Right.
And it's harrowing. It's an amazing book, but man, I was so riveted, but I was so shaken by it. Like, and I was so curious, like how that was for you.
I don't know. I mean, I look back at that book and I genuinely, I wonder where it came from, because it is so anxious. It's such an anxious novel. And I think I wrote it well. I mean, my kids were pretty young when I wrote it. And I think a lot of that new mum anxiety went into it. A lot of just and I didn't realize it at the time, like in my real life, but I think a lot of, you know, when your kids are quite little, it is just like fear, you know, you're just kind of running on fear a lot of the time, that some sort of like crazy
and exhaustion,
obviously, but just the fear that you're going to do something wrong and something,
just trying to keep them alive.
Yeah, basically. And so I wrote this whole novel about a mum who is literally just trying to keep her children alive.
Yeah.
All just kind of poured into that. But to answer your question, Emily, yeah, there were a couple of scenes in that actually I skipped it. Like when because I write in a very linear way. I start on day one and I just keep going. And that novel particularly is like a chase novel. It just goes ahead 8 days or something. And I just write it in order. And I got to the stage where I should have written certain scenes, and I literally just had to put a kind of like a marker in, kind of go. You know, and it was just the very traumatic scene. I couldn't do it.
I know at least one of those. I think yes.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And I had to. It made me kind of feel sort of hollow inside while I was writing it. I don't know.
But was it cathartic? Like, did you feel like you were able to get through like some of those things, those anxieties and fears as a new mom? Like, did you feel at the end of it, did you feel like you had released something?
I suppose so. Do you know what I actually did? Because I actually started to feel quite jinxy. Like I was a bit worried that I would write.
Yeah, that's what I would be terrified of.
I know. And then I had to kind of go off and I literally found myself looking up other authors who've written sort of quite dark stuff, and found out that some of them, you know, had children themselves, and they were, you know, And then I sort of thought, okay, there's clearly not some sort of jinx functioning in the universe where if you write something bad, then
it happens to you.
It's going to happen in real life. Like it's not like that. What was that movie that Emma Thompson wrote, which was about?
But she's writing with the guy's voice. Yeah,
you know, and it literally she writes something and the next day it comes true. It's like that isn't
Stranger Than Fiction.
Stranger Than Fiction.
Yeah.
I have a happy, we've taken a dark turn, but I have a happy story like that. So the first novel I ever wrote, the main character was an author, very inventive of me. And she gets a book deal in the book that gives her money to allow her to do the thing that's the engine of that book. And there's a scene in the book where she's trying to reach everyone she knows and she can't get anyone on the phone. And when I sold my first book, that same thing happened to me. Like I could not get. I tried calling my husband, my best friend, my parents, my sister. And then I was like, this is really weird. This is happening. Like exactly what I wrote 3 years ago in a different book than the one that I sold. But I was like, what is happening?
What about you, Emily? You asked the question. So has that happened to you?
I asked the question and now I don't want to answer it.
Too revealing.
I'll answer for you, Emily. Like, I think you guys, like, maybe you'll remember, I tweeted a couple of years ago about to commit my first murder. and so it was the first time that I'd written, I don't tend to put gore in my books. And it was the first time I had to write, like, somebody killing another person on screen, as they say. And I had to like psych myself up for that. Like, and I had to take a couple of passes at it to like build in the violence for sure, because I was like, oh, okay.
I mean, for me, it's gotten a little easier because I just go into technique mode. I think about technique and not completely try to eliminate the emotion. I will say there is one time that I have cried while I've been writing. And I always just roll my eyes. Like, I'm not going to make myself cry because I know what the story is. And it's not, and I can't. But I did when I wrote the end of Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, the story, Jen's story from 1930. And yeah, it was terrible. I mean, it's who cares, spoilers, but her father kills her. and it's horrible. And I mean, I felt it like in my guts when I was writing it, and I cried. And that's been the first and the last time. And I'm like, Jen, I love you. I'm sorry.
But do you think that's a good sign that you cried?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, so I mean, I don't know.
I didn't know. I've cried a couple of times writing. I have, and I'm not a crier, but I thought that was a good sign. I cried writing. There's a character that dies at the end of I'll Never Tell. I won't say who it is, but I cried when I wrote that scene.
Yeah,
and I was like, but I was like, okay, I'm doing this right. Like, if I knew this was coming the whole time, I'm prepared for this.
Yeah,
it needs to happen, and I'm crying. Like, I knew I was putting the right emotion in the book.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good sign. And the same thing is that if you make yourself laugh, like we all have these moments where like, ha ha ha, I'm so funny. Like, right? Don't we all have these moments where like, you know?
Yeah.
Mostly it's like, this is garbage and it's all needs to be fixed. But every once in a while, it's, you know. So
every once in a while you're like, I'm hilarious.
I'm hilarious. But I think that shines, that comes across. Like, that's okay. We're allowed to feel it. Sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned that you don't like writing any gore, and I have to say I would rather write a murder scene than write a sex scene.
Oh yeah,
and I think that is far scarier. And Amber, I know you went there.
Oh, I don't think I'll ever write a sex scene again. Like, my last book, Raven Lane. It was about like a small neighborhood. Yeah, yeah.
There has to be a sex scene with their swinging.
Like, how can you write about that and not? And there's two, and they were like much more explicit in the draft.
Okay, interesting.
When I read them back, in my head I was like, oh gosh, my dad's gonna read this, you know? And I just thought, oh, I can't. I have to dial it back. But still, like, I think they're suggestive, but there's certainly like some R-rated content in there, and it doesn't cut away, you know, like it doesn't just fade to black when they kiss. Like, there's more things going on. And because of like the nature of the next like two things that I worked on, that there just wasn't a call for a sex scene, and like I just don't feel really drawn to that kind of story right now, because I felt so uncomfortable when it came out. It really was like, oh wow, like this is a lot more revealing than I had imagined, because I write about a lot of personal stuff. Like, there's lots of stuff from my real life that's like embedded in my books, and it hasn't bothered me as much as thinking about my family, like my grandma, like reading these scenes. And I, in fact, like dedicated that book to my grandma, because I really wanted to give her a book, and she's, you know, getting older. And so I wanted to have a book for her, but then I actually wrote like, I'm really sorry about the sex scene. Maybe this isn't the book for you, but
maybe I'd like to apologize. Yeah. My favorite 1-star review of any of my books is for I'll Never Tell, where the woman was complaining as usual about swearing, and then I got to the explicit lesbian sex scene. It's like a 4-line scene, and I was like, good.
Yeah. At which point her review just backfired, because about 100 people just went wrong.
Lesbian sex.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Okay. What page is that on?
Yeah.
But remember, my first book that had a sex scene. So my mom used to read my books as I wrote them, and she's a sex educator. Okay? She taught psychology of sexuality for 35 years. But when I sent her those pages, I was like, warning, sex scene, and she's like, oh, no problem. And then she sent it back, and she's like, couldn't read it.
A long time ago, my brother lent me The Walking Dead, the actual graphic novel, which is the goriest thing I've ever read in my entire life. And I couldn't I liked the story, but I really couldn't handle like the dismemberment parts of it. So I asked my husband to read them first, and just to paperclip the sections that were like really gross together, and then just give me the synopsis, like the plot points that happen in that. Okay, this person lost a leg. This person doesn't have anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of work for him to do.
I know.
Nice of him.
I have a good husband.
Was there a book left? There was like no book left, I guess. So we're coming towards the end of our hour. We're galloping, in fact, towards the end of our hour. And Lauren, a while ago, asked us a question about getting an agent. What agent advice would you have, Emily?
Oh, Well, the way I got my agent was I actually went to a writers conference here in Atlanta, but I know they have them all over the country, and I'm sure in Canada as well. But yeah, and I went and sat and pitched like a little scared little bunny, and I had simultaneously emailed her a query letter. And she was like, "Oh, I think I recognize your name or recognize."
You double pitched her.
I did. I double pitched her. And I actually, at that conference, they have like awards for like best pitch and best. So I won an award from her. And yeah, we ended up working together.
Aww.
So I went to conferences.
Nice.
And just meeting people face to face is.
Yeah. I think you've got to get out there and get to conferences if you can. My little tip would be on Twitter to follow something called #MSWL, which stands for Manuscript Wish List. Yeah. And quite often you find that agents actually put out a little, 1 or 2 line description of what kind of things they're looking for. Now, obviously, that might not be what you've written, but if you keep your eyes open, you start to see which agents are really kind of looking for your kind of. And
they have a whole website as well.
Yeah, well, they do. Yeah, they have their own website. I just followed it on Twitter, and that's literally how I found my agent, was through MWL. So, like I say, we are galloping ahead. We've got 4 minutes left. Catherine, tell us then, just quickly, show us your cover and tell us about your book that's just come out in Canada.
So it's about a woman named Jessica Williams who meets another Jessica Williams at an airport bar. And a week later, oh, look at the tag. That's nice. And you are so fancy. And when Jessica gets home from her vacation, all of her money has been stolen, and it was stolen by the second Jessica, and the cops are not going to do anything about it. And so she decides to try and find her, and finds a string of identically named victims of this same woman.
Okay, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Very high concept, and it's fabulous. Amber, yours is also out now. Can you tell us about yours?
It's not quite out yet. I have the arcs.
I'm all about it.
Okay. My pub date is November 10th, which is a week after the American election. So that's going to be interesting.
At least it's after.
Yeah, I know. I have a friend, we have a friend who's coming out on the day of the election, but it's a tricky time. So, which is 2020 in a nutshell, but basically, like I said earlier, it's a stranger in a strange land story. Mallory Dent has been widowed very recently, moved to a very small northern town in Canada, to a house she's never seen before, and bought it sight unseen, right beside a huge lake. And within hours of her arriving, she gets a knock on the door, and it's a police officer. There's been a drowning in the lake, and she is being investigated for negligence.
Also absolutely brilliant. I loved it. I love the whole sort of mythology around the lake. It's all the things I love in that book. So we look forward to that in November. And Emily, your book is out in September.
Yeah. I think Hawthorne Sisters. It's follow-up to my first book, which I just spoiled for everyone. Honeysuckle Girls. This story is about Eve Candler, whose grandmother was a very famous sort of tent evangelist, faith healer back in the day. And Dove, Jared, has some secrets. And Eve, her granddaughter, is kind of the keeper of her secrets. And is not that happy about it. She comes to Alabama and learns that her grandmother has a very interesting past there that may include some thievery and perhaps murder. And she only has 3 days to figure out if her grandmother was a murderer and do something about it.
Yes. Very cool. Loved it. It was my trip to Alabama. And I will tell you just very briefly about my book, The Last to Know, which came out just over a week ago. And it's about an American journalist who moves to a little village in England where everyone's a bit murdery. Really. And she decides to stay.
Crazy lady.
That's an amazing pitch.
Every book is just like, this book is about a woman. There's lots of people in the book, and some of them are kind of murdery.
Most of them are bad, some of them are not. We find out which. Yeah, that's it.
Cool.
There we go. Thank you so much. I know Catherine has to finish quite soon because she's got to go and, I don't know, do some last minute lawyering before she goes. Lawyering. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Amber.
For having me.
Thanks for having me. Okay.
All right. And thank you,
stay safe, everyone.
You too.
Oh, she's gone.
Oh, bye.
You're a lawyer.
And bye-bye.